Well, here at the Banff Centre, we're about 1,400 meters above sea level. And that means that the air is a little bit thinner and can be trickier for artists to navigate. Now, rarefied air is something that Seungwon Yang is certainly used to occupying. The celebrated French-Korean cellist has performed in almost every major venue in the world that you can think of and has released every incredible cello piece for his very own, alongside some of the world's best orchestras, including, very recently, the Elgar Concerto with the London Symphony Orchestra. Great to see you, Seungwon.
Yeah, great to see you here, up here. What a
Look
beautiful
at
venue.
all in these beautiful places.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about this new record that you just recorded in London. There's, as we're talking about air, there's that moment at the beginning of the Elgar Concerto. There's that very strong and forceful bow stroke. And that takes a certain sort of breath, I would imagine, to take that in. What's that moment like just before you strike those first notes?
You know, it's interesting because it's perceived as forceful. However, if you look at the score of Beatrice Harrison, who recorded with Elgar conducting, it says love and joy. And on the score it says nobilmente, with nobleness. So it's actually a little bit of tragic sound, also a little bit of elegy. However, the hope, the light that they want to seek out to have a better future should be in the chords too. And somehow, exactly what you say, that breath, we try to connect our body, we try to connect with our inner hearing, with the love and joy that Beatrice Harrison wrote on her part with Elgar conducting, you know. So I find our profession as a performers is a true blessing. You know, we perform some of the greatest masterpieces written for literature of classical music. But even better is to try to connect with these spirits, with what they had wished to convey, etc. So for us to seek out these elements, this expression, these feelings that are archived within the notes, within the harmony, within the phrasing, is something absolutely fascinating to make living with. You know?
Absolutely, and so many cellists have made their living, of course, with this famous concerto. Everybody from Yo-Yo Ma to Jacqueline Dupre, very famously, of course.
Casals also.
And Casals, yes, of course. Now, when you are taking those initial breaths and you're playing those first bow strokes of the piece with all of that legacy in mind, what do you feel in that moment as you're breathing in all of the history that comes with this piece?
You know, at that moment, I try to forget the cello. I try to forget the bow, and I really try to connect from my back to my diaphragm, to my lower stomach, to have my natural weight connect with the sound, you know? So it's something extraordinary to try to not to make the cello sound, but make the cello convey the emotion. It's a completely different approach, you know? So we all have different sounds, we all have different weights, we all have different arm strength, hand size, etc. And we all have different emotions to convey too. So right at that moment, I forget about the hand holding the cello, I forget the hand about holding the bow or the cello. I really try to focus on breathing properly, on liberating the anxiousness, but really feel rather tall in my back and try to connect with the joy and love, you know?
Yeah. So that's one thing to be able to do that in an environment like London.
Yes.
But connecting with that air, finding that same sort of posture is, I'm sure, different everywhere in the world, including here at Banff, where the air is a little bit more tricky to come by because we're so high in the altitude. Maybe before we get into that, maybe you can tell me about your first sort of interactions with the Banff Centre and what they meant to you as an artist.
Oh my God, I used to come here from the mid-80s. First of all, for the master classes of the great masters of our heroes, musical heroes, you know. Zoltán Szekely used to be here, János Starker used to be here, Ardo Pariso, of course, Shebok, Yuri Shebok used to come here, Menhem Pressler. So these are legendary musicians who used to come out here for master classes. So, and then after that, I came for 3-4 residencies, and I came for concerts and recordings. In fact, my most sold record, the Kodai album for my EMI debut was recorded here at the Royston Recital Hall.
Wow.
Yeah, and after that I came for a couple of times to be in the jury as a juror for the Banff String Quartet competition.
Sure.
And you know, to be in Banff is something extraordinary because literally your visibility is at the infinite. Somehow you come up here and you know your potential is also infinite. You know the expression can go as far as what you can see.
Yeah.
To be up here, it gives you a totally different frame of what are the possibilities within your own natural talent and what you can do to explore in depth. So Banff has been always a place to grow,
Yeah.
not a place to play better. You know, it was far beyond that. And for me to come back here and this time to work with young musicians, it was very, very rewarding personally, but also rewarding artistically because when I coach young students, we interact. By the way, the program is called Interplay. So we interact, we learn, we inspire each other. And I think somehow you see that we can have a much better world, especially through arts. Yes.
It's amazing to have that boundless sort of optimism and hope for the future that comes from being in a place where there is just so much boundless sort of, yeah, I can do anything. Look at the environment around me. This is totally possible.
Exactly.
How has your relationship with the Banff Centre and maybe the inspiration that it gives you, how has that changed over the years from first coming here for master classes with those great masters, Pressler, Starker, to now, for all intents and purposes, being the master for these young students who are performing here?
Yeah, it has changed in a way. The role has changed. However, I think it's very important for me to understand the purpose of the young artists coming up here and to be present for their needs. You know, it's very different from teaching at my university or as a visiting professor in London for many master classes that I give. The role up here is to see mid to long-term future. As for schools, it's often to prepare the curriculum, to prepare the exams, to prepare the competitions, etc. So it's absolutely essential for young musicians to combine the two. Young musicians should, yes, get ready for the next auditions, competitions, exams, entrance exams for masters or DMA or whatever schools, the next schools, etc. But also it's very important, the way I felt, as I said, I grew here a lot. I grew inside, you know. That inner growth is something very important. So I try to change my teaching, change what I tell them with this vision of what should be the goal for next year or the year after, you know. So that's very, very important.
So in addition to coaching them, these students, in some more traditional sorts of repertoire, the repertoire perhaps that you yourself would have performed here those decades ago, things like you performed the Brahms in the Brahms Clarinet Trio a couple of nights ago as an example, or Janacek's Pohádka. But you also are sharing in new compositions in ensembles alongside
Yes.
of students.
Yes.
Pieces by Missy Mazzoli that you performed
That's
here,
right,
but
yeah.
you've been a champion of contemporary music as well as
Yeah.
that of the more sort of canonical
Yeah.
works. I think about your work with Peter Oetvos, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
What is the difference when you're working on more contemporary music in this space versus interacting with the music that has really stood that test of time?
The music that most often I play are from composers in the past. Therefore, my approach is different in a way that through the harmony, through the structure of the compositions, I interpret their musical ideas. Therefore, my work is not only instrumental, but also very much so in the harmonic voices. You know, for me, it's very important to understand the harmonic structure and to find the right timing to express these harmonies. You know, and of course, the melodies, the themes are based from the harmonies. So therefore, understanding harmony is a very, very important fact. Working with contemporary composers, it gives you a great chance to interact with those who have written these pieces, and you know exactly what they had wished. In exchange, you can also suggest new ideas from their writing, and most of the time when these new ideas that I am suggesting, especially if they're really strongly based from their score, it's an incredible interaction of creativity, you know. Then we create something. It's when I give world premiere, when I give Canada premiere, when I give Korean premiere, Asian premiere, it's on that moment that the audience is listening, discovering, and visualizing a completely new language, new landscape, etc. So it's a mentally very different approach.
Yeah, absolutely. You get those different interactions or interplay,
Yes,
if you will,
exactly,
again.
exactly.
Now, the other thing that you're interacting with alongside the students is the environment. We've talked about that already,
Yes.
but also that sort of different air that
Yes.
exists very literally up here. How do you then approach the playing of pieces that you've shared all over the world in an environment like Banff? In other words, that famous Kodai recording that you made
Yeah.
in the Rolston
Yeah.
all those years ago, how would that have been different if you had recorded it in Paris, in London, in Seoul?
So, you know, for me to be up in Banff, I try to be sensitive to the environment where I am. I travel a lot, but I always try to remain positive. I always try to remain with the place that I am in, etc. And being here up in Banff, it gives you this incredible inner energy. Not muscular energy, but you feel inspired. You feel your inner senses are much better in balance. You have found your equilibrium, the inner equilibrium. Therefore, when you wake up and then you have your breakfast with this view, or you take a walk at Tunnel Mountain, or you go and for hiking around Lake Louise, different trails, you come back and you're absolutely re-energized. And that energy, you know, in Korea we call ki, in Chinese they call qi, but this is something not palatable, this is not something that we can touch, but we can feel. And I am very sensitive to this natural energy which we absorb and inspire us. So playing Kodai Solo Sonata here, music from European Transylvanian mountains, playing them up here in the Canadian Rockies, it was an incredible experience, you know. And also, you know that these voices, these melodies, rhythms, these pulses are coming from way deep in the mountains, and to be playing this cultural heritage which come from the deep mountains in the Canadian Rockies, there's a relationship that you can do in your um, in your inner world, which is really, really inspiring. I find,
Yeah.
I personally find.
I love that image of qi or chi as that sort of thing that you're striving for and you can't quite name, but you know it when
Exactly.
you feel it. It brings to mind the French word jouissance.
Yeah, exactly.
The same sort of image.
Yeah.
Elgar being influenced by something like this air, I would imagine would be different than the Elgar that you would be influenced by as you're recording it in London. How does the environment affect the specific pieces that you play, and maybe is it more attuned to those works that are a bit more naturally oriented to begin with, more in touch with nature? Maybe some Elgar, but I think about also your work with composers like Olivier Messiaen, someone who's very in touch with nature in all of his works. How does an environment like Banff change that versus a different place that you might play?
Actually, to be knowing England climates is very important to understand Elgar's music, because Elgar's harmonic structure is very often varying, just like English weather, you know? Whether he meant it purposely or not, or whether he was naturally an Englishman, therefore his music reflects unconsciously the English weather, I haven't been able to ask him. But many of his harmonic chords are major third with minor sixth, therefore it's minor major keys, etc. So oftentimes he changes the harmony in a way that, to me at least, reminds me of weather changes. You know, sometimes it's drizzling, sometimes the glimpse of sunshine comes through, that little major comes through, and then the gray minor comes back, etc. And England being an island, a big island, very often the rhythmical senses, the rhythmical pulses, for me, they should sound like waves of water. So it has nothing to do with Wagnerian da-ram-ba-dam. English da-ram-ba-dam has to be much wavier than Richard Wagner or late Brahms, etc. You see what I mean?
Something. These are mountains that, as opposed to towering like the ones behind us, they sort of roll. They have a softness to them.
Exactly. So understanding Elgar is very much helped if you do understand, and if you have witnessed English weather, typical English weather. If you have visited English coastal lines, it really helps you understand better. So that's why I think for young musicians to be traveling widely, stay curious, see, feel, and witness different environments is only enriching their musical palette, you know.
What will you be taking from your travels here to Banff this year into your next projects?
Next project is, first of all, to Italy and then back to Korea. Not as greater mountain, but it's still at a Music in Pyeongchang festival.
Okay.
And these places are, for me, meeting places where different people from different backgrounds playing different music come together at a place and share our heritage, you know. And we have this incredible repertoire that we can make music together to convey optimism, to convey the hope that we can all make our world much better, you know. And whether I am up in Banff, whether I am in festivals in Italy or France or Germany or Korea or Japan, that harmony, we talk musical harmony is the chords, but social harmony is something that we strive for.
These days more than ever.
Exactly.
It seems.
Yes.
Seung-Wan Yang, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. I'm so glad that we got the chance to speak here in Banff, and I'm glad that we got the chance to hear
Yes.
you play in
Oh,
Banff as
thank you very
well.
much.
Safe travels, and we hope to reconnect with you soon.
Yes, likewise. Thank you, Nolan.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.